Thanks, Gavin. I'm very excited. I never gave a talk in the art college here before. I suppose, give you a sense. I went to the art school in Limerick in the late 1990s. I did a sculpture course there. At that time, it was quite a liberal education. For sure, you could go to college for free. Um, I got a grant to go to college. The classes were a small number in the classes, so it was a brilliant environment. Um, you could be making sculptures in the morning and performance art in the afternoon. And I only really valued that education years later when I understood that I have no particular skills of any sort. And some way, by moving through the world, you get to encounter things in many different ways as they come to you. So I'm not a vocational artist. I don't just do one thing. I try to do a lot of different things and learn through the encounter and the experience of that. And I'd kind of go back to that a little bit, maybe when you see some of the presentation. It'd be nice for you to think about that in some way. It might generate some thoughts or conversation afterwards. I did an art history course then. I ran a studio in Limerick in the psychiatric hospital in Limerick, where artists would also work with daycare patients. And then in around 2005, after going kind of living in different places around the island, I went off to Frankfurt and I went to this art college called Stadelschule. And I did 3 years there. I don't have a formal qualification from it, but it certainly shaped a lot of the work that you'll see here. In the sense that you'll see sculptures or photographs or different situations on the slides, but it's all really about storytelling. It's about the giving of narrative. It's about trying to think about how that act of narrative and the information we tell each other, the lies we tell each other, the fables we tell each other, forms of truth that we try to empower to each other, how they can be presented in gallery spaces, in publications, or in the curating of exhibitions. So I'm about 20 years into that venture now. And that's predominantly being presented in public galleries in Ireland, in the UK, in Europe, and in America a little bit, and then through publications and trying to be very discursive and talking about the shows, in the sense that I might make an exhibition and I might not like it myself even. So it's not about the heroic act of art making. It's about trying to share and figure out what a kind of communal resource around this thing we're all interested in is. Is that all right? Is any introductions? Yeah. Okay, super. So this is April 1986. This is the letters to the editor page in the Irish Times. A very unusual thing happened that day. They reproduced a photograph on the letters to the editor page. This is something that is unusual to happen. And because it's a little tight on the projection. So the letter is about a monument, unofficial, unauthorized monument that appears on the top of Carrauntoohil Mountain in County Kerry, which is the highest mountain in Ireland, the closest place to Ireland to heaven. And we know that because already in the 1950s, a crucifix has been placed in the background here, which would have little lights on it, a wind turbine. It's windy up on the top of Carrauntoohil. The wind turbine would blow it, the lights would be generated, and you could see the crucifix from a great distance away, anywhere in Kerry on a clear night. So someone came along and they brought a bicycle all the way up to the top of the mountain and erected the bicycle onto the leftover wind turbine that had been blown away, right? And called it a monument to Flann O'Brien's book, The Third Policeman, all right? It stayed there for about 6 weeks, and this was a very important photograph for me to find in my archival digging. And I still show it, like I have it maybe 20 years now, and I still show it a lot. I tracked down who put the bicycle on the mountain. I have the whole history. I could go on for about an hour on it, but I'll just focus in, I suppose, a little bit on the theory of this and why I think it's an important situation in the sense of the west of Ireland, Irish landscape, and the belief systems that shape that in different shapes and form. So in The Third Policeman, Flann O'Brien's book, the atomic theory appears. If you ride your bicycle for 1 hour a day for 5 years, all your energy for life, zest and goodwill will move down through your butt into the saddle of the bike. That's atomic theory. In turn, all the atoms that are circulating around the main part of the bike will come up into you, and you will become 30 and 40% bicycle in extreme cases. You'll be able to recognize someone who's 30 or 40% bicycle, because if they come into the room here, they'll have to walk slowly in a circle to stay upright. Alternatively, they might lean against the wall in a fashion like this. All right? So the whole book then goes off into surreal adventures. Flann O'Brien didn't have the confidence to publish the book. It was written in 1941. He had just taken a hard hit because his first published novel, Swim Two Birds, there was copies of it in a depot in London that was bombed during the Blitz. James Joyce read it with a magnifying glass, said it was a masterpiece. All the copies went up on fire. It sent Flann O'Brien more into drinking and drinking, had no confidence about this book. He told everybody he opened his car door one day in Donegal and the wind blew all the pages all over the countryside and was never to be published. His wife found it and it was published after his death in 1967. In the book, the cops are chasing everybody around. They're stealing everybody's bikes, so they don't have the situation of people being 20, 30, 40, 60% bicycle, okay? But for me, it's a really, really important situation because imagine that now. We're all struggling for this notion of identity, okay? It's one of the things sometimes creates barriers between us, shapes society in ways about division, everything like that. But think about that. Everything you touch would become part of you, okay? So your belief system would be built up directly from the environment that you're around, you know? Every single thing would not just be a alienated encounter. Instead, you touch something, it becomes part of you. You change throughout your life because of the encounters you make for yourself or the incidental situations that come to you somehow or other. How about that, yeah? Okay, so here's Flann O'Brien. That's touching Carrauntoohil. Carrauntoohil's touching Kerry. Kerry's touching all the way up to the western seaboard. And that is touching you right now, wherever the leftovers of that bike is, okay? Everything's interconnected in a formless whole all over the world. Right now we're in China. Ireland's touching the sea's moving all around. We're over in China, right? You can't deny that fact, right? So this kind of openness or this sense that one situation can move into another, a meshwork of things that move all around all the time in this swirl. Somehow we cut out these small pieces of reality to maintain some sort of cognitive reference, okay? And that's what I'm really interested in, that stories don't start somewhere and finish somewhere else. They're moving in some way in this very open form. And how do we hold on to them? How do we articulate them in some shape or other? And how can we form scenarios that are useful for the weight of the world? That's what artists should do, add to the weight of the world, not make it a flimsy place full of dark rhetoric a la Trump, whatever it is, okay? So you could argue a little bit about the purposeful of this in terms of how the left have been thinking in many years. It's certainly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, you can see how a lot of right-wing thinking has been very successful about cutting out certain shapes, ignoring very immediate facts in their way. And the more this goes on in the world, the more I keep coming back to this image and thinking about this fact of interconnectedness. All right? Yeah? Is that, yeah, okay. So I'll just run through a couple of pieces from the last 2 decades, some of them quite briefly, just to give you some, I suppose, case studies or examples of maybe how this idea has come out in praxis. And then after that, I want to focus in on one particular exhibition that I made on an exhibition cycle between 2013 to about 2016, 2017. and it's about stone carving, all right? And I think that after that, then we can open up and have a chat. Or if there's something I'm not being clear about, because I'll kind of go fast sometimes through very particular situations, just stop me, all right? And or challenge me as well. That would be exciting. Can again disrupt the story I've made. Okay, we're all in the room together. It's my friend Eddie Lenihan. Eddie was on TV in the 1980s. Maybe Michael Hawley made reference to Eddie last week. Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose that's something I work very closely with Michael and with a lot of other artists nowadays. And I mentioned that idea of communal working, that it's not like one artist's subject matter is not another artist's subject matter. And so Eddie was on TV in the 1980s. His program was called 10-Minute Tales. It was on children's TV about 3:30 every day. It lasted for 2 seasons. Eddie goes still around Clare, Kerry, goes up to the fireplace of an aging population with the tape recorder and does ethnographical fieldwork recording the folklore of these areas, right? His theory is you can arrive to someone's house, they've got all the stories lined up for you, ready to go. You do one day of that, you do a second day of that, and maybe by the third morning, people run out of stories which have a coherent beginning, middle, and end. And that's when the fragments come out, situations that cannot be explained or synthesized into the traditional narrative. And he's been at this a long time. He kind of pretty much scared most of the kids of my generation because of 10-Minute Tales. So I was very shy as a younger artist to come to him. And then I made a video with him that's had a regular exhibition schedule for many years. And it's all about this bush that maybe you have already known or visited. He did it all. Super, super. So Eddie and I had to break into the building site on that Saturday evening to make the video. Because the workers there were suspicious of us. Okay. And his concern was, of course, this large earth-moving machine up on the top of the embankment here would destroy the bush and unleash fairy anger upon the road. And as you all know, when you drive by the Junction 10 on the way to Limerick, that bush is still there. He managed to get the road bent around the bush. So this is late 1990s. Swampy is cutting tunnels down underneath the land for Manchester Airport runway extension. He just gets like 100 grams of tobacco and disappears underneath the ground. He's just smoking under the ground. All Glenada Downs is happening in County Wicklow. There's the first surge in some way in the British Isles around the necessity to think about environmentalism. And Eddie's the guy who actually gets the road changed. You know, a lot of that other stuff, the infrastructure steamrolled its way. People who were involved in the protests, many of them went into civil service, looked at other ways to change that paradigm, which I think is something to be studied and considered a lot more. But this guy's my hero, you know? Plus, in case Michael didn't tell you this last week, Eddie has a beard that also seems to look like the bush he's protecting, all right? Another project, this is an installation shot of homemade stainless steel sculptures, which are the same shape as the DeLorean DMC-12 sports car, which, as you know, was in Back to the Future. It got turned into the flux capacitor machine in Back to the Future. And this is, I suppose, a good kind of maybe explanation about how some of these ideas or investigations become materialized in a gallery form. So you go into the space, you'd have a look at some photos on the wall, you see these underwater photography images, and then these shapes here. All the captions are very, very detailed, very specific about what's going on, and there'd be a 12-page booklet that used to be handed out as part of the show. So it's heavy enough on the context, always wanting to try and give as much to audiences as possible, not being reductive in that relationship. And I was always into this idea that you nourish an audience. If someone travels to see your show, you want to give a lot and not be reductive. And I think that's something to do with the purposes of orality and narrative and storytelling and how that manifests in spaces that traditionally want to cut things down into that, you know? And the story for this particular piece goes a little bit like this. This is a press photograph made by the DeLorean Motor Car Company. You can see the well-off three people in the background have absolutely no interest in looking at the Lear jet behind them. Instead, they want to look at the back of this car. And this was generated as press images by John DeLorean, a former General Motors car executive who took Labour money from the British government when Labour were in charge in the 70s, moved to war-torn Belfast, set up a factory with 3,500 people there building this particular car. His idea was if you could make a car that looked real good and was made out of stainless steel rather than other metals, it would never rust. This would be the utopia car and it would last forever. In reality, it was a disaster. Margaret Thatcher read, when she came to power, read that he had taken some of the grant money to do up his bathroom and installed golden faucets in the bathroom. She initiated an investigation into DeLorean, cut the funding for the 3,500 workers. He began then going all over the world looking for extra capital to try and invest in this failing project he had made in Belfast. In the meantime, it turned out that the faucets weren't gold, they were only gold plated. And he was arrested on the, I used to know the date. I know it now, 15th of October 1982, in the Sheraton Lorena Hotel, Suite 504, trying to deal $20 million worth of cocaine. Okay, the FBI caught him. The next day, the factory closes in Belfast. All the scrap dealers of Ireland turn up in Dunmurry, slightly outside the city, to remove what's left from the liquidation sale. All these kind of body parts, all that sort of stuff, everything, filing cabinets, it's all going to the scrap yards, and especially these huge chunks of metal, which give shape to these kind of iconic forms that you will be familiar with this machine. So you get a piece of stainless steel, you put it in the middle and it goes pa-tump, and it just makes the shape of it, it stamps it out. And these things were very important in the production line, but now that the car wasn't being made anymore, they were bought by scrap dealers in Ireland. They were out in Galway Metal in Oranmore. They were one of the dealers that brought them there. From Oranmore, they were sold to fishermen in Kilkieran out in Connemara, and then they were reused. These huge lumps of metal were reused as anchors for salmon fish farms in Kilkieran, right? So I found them. And as you can see, this is what I'm talking about, the shape of the world, you know, about how narratives come in and out of each other somehow or other. That this is well, we have it's a bit bright in here, but you can make it out. It's a swimming crab, feisty enough lad, but for some reason, the shape of him is uncannily like the shape of the car. All right. Here's another image. Again, as you know, the Atlantic gusts come in, sweep the bottom of Kilkieran Bay clean. When we sent down divers down there, I expected just bits of metal sticking up out of the ocean, nothing very spectacular. Instead, this incredibly thriving ecosystem that's built up around these tooling presses. So here's the press here. Here you can see some of these kind of shapes would have been used in the car. And nowadays, somehow you've got a passenger. This guy looks like a passenger with the window down, no? So I was very interested in these kind of chains of handling, how objects move from one situation to another, how attitudes change and shape situations like this, but also to try and find very, very specific examples of this happening, all right? The reason for this also comes from Galway and reading Tom Duddy. Tom Duddy, the great, I don't know, only Marxist critic, the best Marxist critic and poet, He wrote a lot of polemic in Circa magazine in the 1980s, and he would speak about the Irish landscape and how a lot of the time painters, when they would approach it, would think about that as a particular place of some sort of transience or momentary revelation. And like, for example, there would have been many modernist paintings in Ireland. Painters in Ireland would want to paint the fog. How do you paint this kind of incredible landscape around us? And in some way, Duddy rallied against that. And he said also we have to look at very particular examples. We can't always genericize somehow or other the landscape. There's all these other things moving along in different ways around it, and that the visual art of the time should somehow respond to this or be aware of this and think about that. And that was a Marxist ideology that he wrote a lot. And I would always think of him, and I would always think of that attitude, that everything is different. Every stone you unturn, there's a different situation. The sun is shining this way on the stone, the sun shines that way on the stone. They're two different ecosystems all together in one place. And yeah.
Can I just interject, to narratives, interlocking, and historical of the opening?
Really? Oh, brilliant. Super. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah. And that really drove a lot of this work, and driving all the time into landscape, asking questions. And some of these pieces began in the late 2000s, when I still think there was that kind of openness about what was available as an online resource or something you could research in a computer, and what you actually had to go and ask somebody about. All the stuff in our heads that hadn't been drained out at that stage and put into data farms and all this sort of stuff. So it was made of that particular time. Also, a lot of other artists were working in that way, I guess, and with funny images, no? You want to do it again another time? Huh? It is, yeah. And also the DeLorean advertising had seagulls. Sometimes they would morph into a seagull and fly away. Now, as you all know, he's not that big in real life. It's just a projection. Don't be worried. So I suppose this kind of idea, just briefly, this is a presentation at the Venice Biennale in 2015. You'd come in and you'd see this very large plinth, it's about 7 meters by 6 meters, and on it maybe a dozen, 15 different items or articles that had all come from individual research strands I was doing at the time, and they made very, very, very little sense all together on the plinth, John Burke, piece he made down in Cork, James, and the Cork City Council dug a hole, and they have it half buried on the way into the city in a depot there to this day. That's a scale model of it. Carving a kind of river god guy, plastic fruit, some pieces by Boris Artsy Bashoff, who I'll refer to later. Just a bunch of stuff that doesn't make all that much sense together. And then the longer you'd stay in the space, then this video would be there, about 15 minutes long, and would slowly develop this narrative that everything on the table somehow was helping each other out, or situations would happen where art would find its way into the world and find maybe a difficult reception, find itself in a very particular idiosyncratic scenario. And then the next artwork would come along and go, come on, I'm going to get you out of that hole. We're going to do it together, okay? And that became a mode of working for me for quite a period of time, 6 or 7 years, where you'd come into a gallery. You know that feeling you have when you come into a gallery, first of all, and you're looking at stuff and you're going, sure, what is it? What's going on? This moment of estrangement you have from somebody else's intentions. And I do this with 4 or 5 galleries, and then maybe there would be a slide projection or a video assembled in the middle that would bring all these disparate strands together, all right? And I think that's what I mean about this idea of cutting realities out for a certain period of time and letting them experiment with each other, have an openness. The other thing I thought was, so you've got to have analogies for your work or think about it. I always thought these guys were just sharing a room, like they were all renting the one house. And somehow they would have these moments of engagement, which was partly about giving certain things away about them, but also they could hold things close in their own trajectory through stuff. And this is very much about the idea of, I suppose, material has life or agency. and how that's brought upon us. And maybe we're just on the sidelines, actually, sometimes being able to shepherd things on in a certain way, but also maybe having very, very little control about the shape of the world and wider agendas in it. So the last, I suppose, substantial work is a public artwork that's up in Melbourne now in Australia. This is about uh, maybe 12 or 13 meters across. It's a 3/4 replica. The title of the piece is Distant Things Appear Suddenly Near. Uh, it's a temporary work that's in the city for the next, it's probably going to be there for 4 or 5 years in its entirety. I was asked to make an artwork in this area of the city in front of the university, which will be redeveloped into a subway station, and they're building a new metro. Sorry, God, I'm in your way. A metro station in the middle of the city. So, as I was doing my research around the town, there was a bar called the Corkman Bar, which was really maybe about 80 meters away from this site, that some building developers came in on a Sunday morning with the wrecking ball and they destroyed the bar. And once it was destroyed, it's a heritage building, of course. Once it was destroyed, they wanted to put up a 15-story apartment block with apartments for rich people to buy. And I said, okay, let's remake the bar. And so it's a kind of Wild West film set vibe of the bar, about 100 meters away from this demolition job was done. It's about 3/4 size, so you'd hit your head off of the door sometimes going in. And it's built against all these skyscrapers coming rapidly towards it in a city that has extreme wealth and an interest in changing itself into a skyscraper city and having more barriers for, in some way, an exclusionary element through this idea of how capital is realized there. And at the back of the whole structure, it turns into some sort of a scrapyard, I suppose. The trees were cut down 10 years before that. They're elm trees. They had lived their life as colonial objects. There's no elm trees indigenous to Australia. When they were planted there in the 1880s in the park, they were done in the shape of a Union Jack. So the whole park had a profile like that. So these guys, like you're a tree and you're getting caught up into a colonial plan and map straight away. So they cut the trees down, they left them on the edge of the city trying to figure out something to do with them. And once I got my hands on them, I said, let that be their retirement home. Let them come back to the place they were in and they can sit there and they don't have any agenda being thrown at them other than just being there. So it's a good bit of lifting now in that. And this kind of scrapyard keeps going around it a bit. Some work by the Iranian-Australian artist Hussein Balamanish, a very important figure in this kind of a very particular sculptural tradition in Australia. He made a piece with a boat, with a pier, you see in the background, and this figure. Builders came along one night when angle grinders, you get an angle grinder, but in late 1990s, you could get an angle grinder with a battery pack. So that meant you could go around anywhere and angle grind without having to plug into the wall. So they chopped that up one night in half and threw it into the river because it was too heavy to lift to the scrapyard for recycling. So all these things would have these very particular stories, very particular situations, which seem to be about the constant reshaping of a city in one way or other. And again, they're all kind of coming together at Buddies in this particular place for a period of time to point out maybe the dance of the city or a kind of ballet or something that urban renewal is involved in. So that's still there. It's meant to become a ruin. There's been a lot of work on the vegetation around it in the last while. The timber has got very rickety looking, and it's somehow, for me, become a very important way and a very, very labor intensive project to make as well. So I think you can see a line of thinking maybe from the earlier works, yeah?
People that sit around there like
Yeah, and now all this parkour culture, when people climb and jump in the city. So I had to like make friends with all these parkour guys, which I'm not. Look at the cut of me. I'm not jumping, and because they would go up and they'd steal the top, the little fleur de lis on the top of it, which in some way I've no problem with, but then I'm also going, well, it looks kind of shit now that one of them is gone, like. So it's about like testing yourself in those situations. And I think public art is very interesting field like that because um an awful lot of things can happen. Out the other side of it, for example, these are also leftover Victorian streetlight lamps. And then we also found a big batch of traffic cones, and there's a kind of traffic cone island. There's a beside part of the sculpture around here. There's like 20 traffic cones. They're just left there, and it's very unsure whether they're part of the sculpture or not. And now I've been the curator is noticing that kids, when they have a few drinks, they get traffic cones from the city and they bring them, they add them to the pile there. So I don't know. That's fine, you know. And I'm interested in that situation. You have to let go at a certain point and see what that reaction is.
Yeah, why such antagonism from the builders that they
Yeah.
actually shut off?
Well, it's a long story. It was a casino was being built in by the Yarra River. This was the commission for the casino. Hussein didn't want to do something that was easy for them. He made a work that wasn't all that dissimilar to this. And then they started a building site right beside it, and the builders were just coming down, picking pieces off the sculpture and taking them to the scrapyard, and getting money for it. So the city decommissioned it in agreement with him. It was there for 5 or 6 years. And Hussein has passed since the commission was made. But like part of, I suppose, my belief around this is that there's still a latency or an energy that exists in art making beyond its exhibition value. All right. And I called up, I called Hussein and said to him, look, this is a very important thing. It's still in storage here in the city. Is there some way we could, as artists together, think about some way of how this would be realized? And I get a great education out of this because he was a brilliant sculptor. He'd done loads of public art all over Australia and different parts of Europe. And sometimes I'd show him the plans here and he'd be able to shift something a foot or a half meter, and suddenly the piece would sing a lot more than what it would before. And so I suppose it's just about re-energizing those scenarios or making sure that that kind of energy around that sort of stuff can get its due day. And not every sculptor would agree to have a piece that they spent time and energy on and got cut in half and got fucked into the river to put it back out and show again, you know? But maybe that sense of resilience is something I was interested in asking about or getting to know a bit better from my own practice as well. Yeah, yeah. He never did a show in Ireland, Hussein. Um, Tom Fitzgerald would be the equivalent, I think, here. The kind of work that Tom makes, Hussein would be in that modality, I think, in a South Australian sensibility. Okay, I'm talking a bit now, so I'm going to try and go to and so you see the pub there. All right. I go quite quickly through these slides because I'm running a little late. This was an exhibition in Modern Art Oxford. This is the restaurant in the gallery. I'm very interested in having shows in the spaces just outside of the gallery or not quite in the gallery. And I've done that for many years. My presentation here is a selection of material from a fried chicken shop in London. This is the sign that I pilfered from the chicken shop as well. And then you see a tiny little rock here that I got from the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is an ethnographical museum in Oxford. This is the case it's normally presented in the Pitt Rivers. You can see it there on the left-hand side, natural stone resembling a monkey's head. Yeah, and when I turn the slide and you'll see the monkey's head. Yeah. So like the curator was just on into work one day and he was looking at a stone in the ground and he saw that it had a resemblance to a monkey's head and he just brought it in and accessioned it into the collection. The fried chicken shop, this is an archive of favorite fried chicken, which I'll go into in a minute. This is Chucky the Chicken, their logo that was designed by, for me, as yet unidentified art student from Southend Polytechnic in the summer of 1987. And then you go into the gift shop where you have all this jewelry you can buy, and more stuff from the fried chicken shop would start appearing in display cases. So, you know, people don't want greasy stuff really in a museum gift shop, or like you get the thing for the burger beside nice designer handbags in the store as well. And then you keep drifting. It's a second image, but there'll be a big stone carving as well in another room there. And then you go around the corner of the gallery, and there was a full-blown stone carving symposium going on, right? And very, very little explanation about why all this stuff was there. Until you would move into the central room and there'd be a 20-minute slideshow that would start going, okay, here's the narrative and here's what this is all trying to attempt on this basis. You can see some stuffed owls that I got from the Natural History Museum in the dark space as well. Always watching the slideshow. I always think it's a shame artists don't put more funny stuff into dark corners of galleries and museums, or things could be tripped over. And all of this came together to tell a story about this man. His name is James O'Shea. This is the only photograph ever taken of him. It was done in October 1859. Here you can see him standing beside a very, very large sculpture he's after carving outside the building where those artifacts were found. This is the Natural History Museum in Oxford. I'd always heard about him at the end of lectures, you know, like there'd be stuff, art history lectures, and they'd be talking about artisanal histories in Ireland. And then nobody really knew very much about O'Shea. He'd be kind of dropped in as someone who knew John Ruskin, who was an important figure somehow or other in Victorian Britain, but the research hadn't really been done to a huge extent. So he'd be mentioned in this book, he'd be mentioned he carved there. Nobody knew whether he was born in Cork or in Kilkenny at the time of when this exhibition was made. Somehow survived the famine, somehow arrived fully formed as a stone carver without any formal education that anybody knew of in Dublin in the mid-1850s. And so I thought I'd like to find out more about this fella, and maybe through art making I can find ways to do that. Where to start, you know? Start as an academic thing, start talking to, you know, how do you structure that, the biography of somebody who doesn't have a biography, you know? Do you do it through academic means? Do you do it like one of those TV programs where they're inside in the archives pulling at things? You know, is there other ways of finding ourselves or finding situations through tangential thinking and this idea that everybody is touching something that's touching everything else? So why don't we try construct a history for this lad starting 1988 on a high street in London, when KFC pulled their franchises out of the fried chicken shop scene on these streets. Instead, KFC would like to have branches in shopping centres or on high streets, but not in neighbourhood streets like this. A group of former franchisees from KFC come together and start the company Favorite Fried Chicken. So this stuff's half the price of what you pay in McDonald's, as you know. These are some attempts at their graphic identity from the start. Ropey enough drawing. I think you're all qualified if you're in art college to acknowledge that. This is a later version, this kind of Winston Churchill. Did the egg come first or the chicken come first? And then finally, they settle on Chucky the chicken. So I went into this fried chicken shop and I began researching the site because I'd heard a rumor that the first time anybody ever put something on show in a museum context or in public space in the English speaking world happened at this very, very site. Okay, sure, before there was wonder cameras for rich people in their houses where they would display objects from all over the world, but the first time that you could pay £2 in to a museum and see different things happened right on this street corner here in South Lambeth in London. Uh, that's what it looks like on the inside. And this fella on the same site in 1630, John Tradescant, he went all over Siberia, Virginia, and America, and he started collecting things to form this museum called the Ark. That is 150 years before the British Museum. Here's one of the things he found, for example, in Scotland. It's a plant in the shape of a sheep, okay, which is now extinct because the problem was if you're a sheep and also a plant at the same time, by the time you eat all the grass around here, you can't move on to eat the grass anywhere else. So you're doomed. These incredible situations about gaps in knowledge and this idea that we have to fill everything up, and somehow this creature was in the museum or some leftovers of him. This is a list of different things. There was a dodo in the museum as well. Again, somehow related to Chucky the chicken, I suppose, formally. A guy called Ashmolean took Tradescant out drinking at Christmas time, got him to sign a piece of paper saying, when you die, everything you own is mine. Tradescant died. They moved all this collection out to Oxford and they started the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And then years later, when they start dispensing this collection in different, here we go. And the dodo comes out to Oxford with that, all right? So this is the beginning of museum culture in this sense, which is about shady dealings, getting drunk and trying to get someone else's property, making sure animals are extinct. It's the nightmare of accumulation, right? And how better than to realize the potential of this, but build a museum to house it all in. This is the building site for the Natural History Museum in Oxford. And this is where John O'Shea worked, okay? He made carvings in Dublin like this. Incredible, right? Here he is fooling a bird to come down to pick berries off the stone. He's that good a carver, he can fool the birds, all right? Then you go around different parts of the building in Dublin before he goes. You've got a serpent, you've got an eagle. All this stuff is way up high on the building, you know? Here's an image before he arrives in Oxford, again carved in Trinity College in Dublin, some humanoid form grabbing the tail of a cat with a mouse in her mouth. Virtuoso stuff, right? He photographed all of this, petitioned all the folk in Victorian Britain to take him on as the prime stone carver on the most important museum building ever erected in the British Empire. Before he left Dublin, this is also one of the carvings he made, controversial at the time because the theories of Charles Darwin were coming to the fore, and we know that this is not a monkey, but it's in fact the beginning of man. Two things tell that way. First of all, one hand is touching the feet to see what you do if you would stand up straight all the time, and the other hand, if you've noticed, is scratching his arse. So that's a telltale sign of the development and evolution of man. Uh, on the boat over to Liverpool, O'Shea became aware of Punch magazine, representations of the Irish as the edge of the empire, being a primate race, all the prejudices that were being brought by empirical knowledge onto situations like that. Here's three versions of Irish's monkey culture that would have been prevalent at the time. This is the simple Irishman scratching his head, trying to give you directions to wherever you asked him you wanted to go. Here's two Irish men drunken, shouting, looking for freedom away from the crown, but not knowing how to achieve it. So then taking another drink and continue to shout. And then you've got the fanged version of Irish nationalism who will do violence to achieve that great aim. These stereotypes, of course, keep moving on in different ways. For example, you would look at the Houston Chronicle newspaper in the 1980s with the IRA represented as chimpanzees in a bomb. O'Shea carves monkeys. That's a big thing for him, okay? Here's the Kildare Street Club in Dublin, the only place in Ireland you could get decent caviar at the time. Here he is lampooning all the gentlemen of the aristocracy inside by saying they're nothing but monkeys. This is out in the front of the building. And so he arrives in Oxford. They think from his portfolio he's the best stone carver they've ever seen. They build for him a special studio on the grounds of this. This is his studio here, especially for him, right? He can go up the scaffold in different places, here, there, and everywhere, and carve whatever he likes on the building, because he's the reincarnation of the medieval gilded stone carver, right? He goes and sees things he'd never seen before in the natural history collections and specimens that have been brought from all over the world and to the site in Oxford. What's that for carving, huh? On the inside of the building, right? He's hopping inside and outside. His fee for doing all of this work as the best stone carver in the world at the time is the equivalent of 20 euros a day. He's looking at architectural treatises, finding material he'd never come by before. He'd go down to the Botanic Gardens in Oxford, take plants there, bring them right up, put them on the scaffold, no working drawings, no clay models, carving straight from life, okay? Everybody was very impressed with that because it meant he was more economical compared to the other stone carvers around the time who were all making drawings before they go anywhere up near a scaffold, okay? So he's the guy, right? He wins a prize of £5 from John Ruskin as well, okay? It's big money, £5. This gives you an example of his vigor and his thought patterns and his virtuoso skill, all right? This is what the window would look like before he'd start working on it. All the masonry is in place. He was instructed by the museum that he should carve only this arch up here and back down here. Certainly not carve that, but maybe a little bit in here, okay? Keep it light, but get the carvings done. He went straight up on the first window and carved everything like that because he realized that if he did that to one window to keep the symmetry in the building, he'd have to carve the next 20 windows the same way, and he'd be sorted for work there all the time. He wouldn't have to become a traveling stonemason. I feel like I should have a pointer. This is the start of his downfall. These are, it's called a cat window. So these are known in Oxford as cats. He started carving these not as cats, but as monkeys, okay? And the foreman came down to him, he said, you can't carve a monkey on the front of the most important museum building being erected in the world right now, because not everybody in this university agrees with Charles Darwin's ideas. And if you carve a monkey on the front of this building, it's going to look like the university are endorsing theories of evolution, which we certainly are not. O'Shea turned around to me and said, hang on a second now, you told me I could carve whatever I wanted on the front of the building. And he wrote a letter, which was important because loads of people thought he was illiterate and an Irish man of that style. And explains that this is a very important thing for him. And, you know, if he can get 5 monkeys in that one, he'll do 10 in the next one. And they say, no, you have to carve it as cats, okay? And there they are, right? He had a big falling out with everybody on the site over it. He arrived one morning to the front doorway and he started hacking. You see this work on the right-hand side. All this still remains to this day on site. I was working there, nobody really knew what it was. You know, it was just incidental lack of order, I suppose. But they're parrots and owls, okay? You see the head of a parrot here, the body of it, the owl, the parrot, yeah? Parrots repeating themselves over and over again until that story becomes the only story. Owls, the wise authorities of the museum and the college. Parrots repeating themselves over and over again. So there's a rhythm, a song there in the way he carved all of this. They threw him off the site. He went back to Kilkenny and he carved gravestones for the rest of his career. But I suppose part of the interest in ethnography with this kind of work and trying to push things all the time in terms of finding the most sometimes particular pieces of information and then bringing that back to see if that alters or changes the narrative became really, really apparent in this window. So I want to finish with a reading about the window and talk a little bit about it. Is that okay, Gavin? Am I okay in time? This will take 5 minutes. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. These are no ordinary cats. These are the king cat of Kesh Corran. Up in the caves in Corran, the story is, in Sligo, the story is that there's cats there. The caves are the entranceway into hell, okay? And if you try to go into the caves, the cat will throw you out of it and tell you to move on somewhere else, all right? The story was never written down in my knowledge during O'Shea's time. The only person who wrote it down was Ella Young in 1920, and I'll read a little bit about her in a moment. But this is incredible. So he left a curse on the building. All those dead animals inside, all those things that had life that were now behind museum display cases, all the imperial attitudes that shape a building like this. What he's saying is that's a hellhole in there. This is a warning sign for you on the front of the building, and I'm going to get the king cats of Kesh Corran to tell you that. That's serious iconography, right? That's serious stuff. And that's still there in that building to this day, that eternal curse that if you accumulate, then other people have nothing, right? Here's the writing. So Ella Young, this is the story O'Shea would have heard and would have known of and would have been spread throughout stone carvers. And it's about on Gabon Sayre, the first builder of Ireland. Grew up in the Burren. He had a boulder as a pillow. One day the tools fall out of the sky and he gets shaping Ireland and shaping all those myths and everything around the place. I'll just read a little bit of it, but please think of O'Shea and this journey I'm trying to describe in this artwork in terms of what's here, all right? So the Gabon walked at his will. He came to a place where a great chief's dune was a building. The folk that fashioned it were disputing amongst themselves. It is right, said one who had an air of authority and a red cloak on him. It is right that the lintel should have an emblem to show the power of the dune, an emblem to put loosening of giants and terror upon evildoers. It's more fitting, said another, that the man who carves the emblem should be honoured in it. Nay, say a third, it's the man who raised the stone and the money should be honoured in it. I myself should be honoured. So the Gabon Sayre came on to these three guys and he says, have you any work for a craftsman? They says to him, you're not a craftsman, look at your shoes. And they all walked off to lunch. And when they were all gone to lunch, the Gabon Sayre set upon a task to carve the window on the front of their building as fast as he could. And they all came back. And when they came back, the first of them caught sight of the carving. The cry ran from man to man of them. There was hand clapping and amazement. The Gabon had carved the king cat of Kesh Corran, more terrible than a tiger. The cat crouched midway in the lintel, and on either side of him spread a tail worthy that royal one, Bristling with fierceness, it spread. It slid along on either side with insinuating grace and infinite cunning, losing itself at the last in loops and twists and foliations and intricacies that spread and returned and established themselves in a mysterious, magical, spell-knotted forest of emblems behind that flat-eared, threatening head. There's an emblem for the builder in that, said the Gabon, and an emblem for the carver, and an emblem for the man who planned the dune, and for the earth that gave the stone for it. Is it enough? Oh, it is enough, O master craftsman, O choice you are, our treasure. Stay with us. The chief seat in the assembly shall be yours. The chief voice in our council shall be yours. Stay with us, royal craftsmen. I have the wisdom of running water and growing grass, said the Gabon, and my feet must carry me further. Still water is stagnant. May every day bring laughter to your mouths and skill to your fingers. May the cloaks of night bring wisdom. And he left them. Often he was wandering after that when the sun was proud in the sky. He drank honey mead in fairy mounds. He saw mountain sprites dancing. So that's what's going on there now, huh? Yeah. So thrilled to be able to live a life where I'm privileged enough to have time to be able to research these things, find encounters that are incidental, that build up in some way through these artworks. It's been a very important journey for me to understand this lineage and how intentions and ideas materialize themselves in the world and make it such a complicated place that we live in, I suppose. So that's just a bit of the mischief I can get to anyway. All right? Okay, thanks. Yeah. Yeah.